What happens when a country replaces its president? Again, not after a full term, not after a national election, but after another congressional removal in the middle of political tension. Peru has just sworn in a new interim president, 83-year-old veteran politician, constitutional lawyer, longtime congressman, José María Balcázar. But this moment is bigger than one oath ceremony, because Peru has now had 8 presidents since 2016. In less than a decade. Is this democratic accountability or systemic instability? Tonight, we break down the rise of Balcazar, how he came to power, what risks he faces, and whether Peru's democratic system is stabilizing or fragmenting. Because this is not just about leadership. It's about institutional endurance. This isn't an isolated event. It's a cycle. Presidents removed, executives impeached, Congress fractured, protests in the streets. On the streets of Lima, political fatigue is visible. Citizens have watched leadership rotate at a pace rarely seen in modern democracies. Former interim President José Jerry was removed after controversy and mounting political pressure. Congress then voted internally. Balcazar was elected head of Congress. Under Peru's constitutional framework, when the presidency becomes vacant, the head of Congress assumes interim leadership. So yes, this was legal, procedural, constitutional. But here's what many observers are asking. When a constitutional mechanism is used repeatedly, does it protect democracy or strain it? That is the deeper tension. To understand this moment, we need to understand the man. José María Balcázar is not an outsider. He is a lawyer, a former judge, a long-serving congressman, representative of the Lambayeque region. At 83, he becomes one of the oldest leaders to assume Peru's presidency, even in interim capacity. Supporters describe him as experienced, institutional, legally grounded. Critics argue he represents the entrenched political class, old power networks, continuity without reform. He is politically aligned with Peru Libre, a left-leaning party associated with earlier political turbulence. That alignment matters, because in divided political environments, perception becomes power. Peru's system allows Congress to remove a president under a doctrine often described as moral incapacity. In theory, this is a safeguard. In practice, its repeated use has created volatility. Inside Congress, votes move quickly, coalitions shift rapidly, and executive authority becomes fragile. But here's the key question. If impeachment becomes common, does that strengthen accountability or weaken governance? Repeated turnover disrupts policy continuity. Ministers change. Economic plans pause. Administrative momentum slows. Temporary leadership can still have permanent consequences. Public reaction has been mixed. Some Peruvians see this as necessary constitutional correction. Others see it as elite reshuffling disconnected from everyday realities. Rising prices, job insecurity, public safety concerns, corruption fatigue. Political exhaustion is not loud, but it is powerful. When voters repeatedly see presidents removed before completing terms, trust declines. And democracy does not function on laws alone. It functions on belief. Right now, belief is fragile. Markets do not fear democracy. They fear unpredictability. Peru has historically maintained one of Latin America's stronger economies, largely supported by its mining exports. But repeated leadership turnover sends signals. Signals that investors interpret carefully. Delays in infrastructure projects. Pause in foreign direct investment. Currency sensitivity. Increased borrowing costs. Inside financial circles, the question is simple. Will this transition stabilize the environment or prolong uncertainty? If Balcazar projects order and electoral integrity, confidence may steady. If political infighting escalates, economic pressure grows. Political instability rarely remains domestic. Regional governments observe carefully. Trade partners assess risk. International institutions evaluate democratic resilience. Inside diplomatic circles, the questions are direct. Is constitutional order intact? Will elections proceed on schedule? Will the transfer of power be credible? April 2026 is not just another election date. It is a credibility test. Let's be clear. Balcazar is not expected to serve long-term. His role is transitional, to maintain governance, to oversee elections, to prevent escalation. Interim leaders are not judged by sweeping reforms. They are judged by whether they preserve process. If elections are transparent and accepted, Peru may reset. If elections are contested or chaotic, instability deepens. And here's what many analysts emphasize. His legacy will not be written in legislation. It will be written in procedure. At 83, Balcazar represents longevity in politics. For some, that signals wisdom. For others, stagnation. Age itself is neutral, but symbolism is not. Does he represent institutional continuity or generational disconnect? That debate shapes public psychology more than policy papers. 3 risks stand out clearly. Public protests if frustration intensifies. Congressional fragmentation blocking governance. Legal or political controversies resurfacing. Interim leadership is a narrow bridge. Move too aggressively, criticism follows. Move too cautiously, authority erodes. Balance becomes survival. Peru's repeated transitions raise global questions. How resilient are democratic systems under repeated stress? When impeachment becomes frequent, is it accountability or institutional fragility? When legislative bodies dominate executive turnover, does it reflect constitutional strength or systemic imbalance? Peru is becoming a live case study in democratic endurance, and the world is watching. Yet crises create opportunity. If Balcazar communicates transparently, avoids partisan escalation, respects constitutional boundaries, ensures credible elections, he could be remembered as a stabilizer, not a disruptor. History often treats interim leaders differently. They are judged not by ideology, but by whether they prevented collapse. It is too early to declare success. Too early to declare failure. He has just taken office. The coming months will determine, can he calm factions? Can he maintain order? Can he deliver credible elections? Leadership is defined in turbulence, and Peru is in turbulence. If Peru's recent history teaches anything, it is this. The presidency may change, but Congress remains the battlefield. Inside Peru's legislature, alliances are fluid. Coalitions form quickly and dissolve just as quickly. Since 2016, Peru has seen 6 presidents take office, most amid crisis or constitutional confrontation. Pedro Pablo Kaczynski, Martín Vizcarra, Manuel Merino, Francisco Sagasti, Pedro Castillo, Dina Boluarte. Presidential exits have rarely been decided purely at the ballot box. They have unfolded through impeachment votes, through constitutional interpretation, through legislative maneuvering. Under Peru's constitutional framework, Congress holds the authority to remove a president on grounds such as moral incapacity, a clause repeatedly invoked in recent years. This creates structural tension. When Congress becomes the central axis of power, executive authority weakens, and governance becomes reactive rather than strategic. The question now is larger than one administration. Will Congress cooperate through the next electoral cycle? Or will fragmentation continue? Because without legislative alignment, even temporary stability remains fragile. Political instability in Peru has not remained confined to parliamentary halls. It has spilled into the streets. Following the removal of Pedro Castillo in late 2022, protests erupted across multiple regions. Roadways were blocked, public squares filled, security forces were deployed. In Lima, demonstrations became symbols of a deeper frustration, not only with one leader, but with a cycle of repeated disruption. When leadership transitions feel constant, public trust erodes, and when trust declines, street power rises. This creates dual pressure, institutional maneuvering at the top, popular frustration at the base. If both intensify simultaneously, Leadership becomes delicate. The executive must navigate Congress and public perception, because legitimacy today is not only constitutional. It is psychological. Political instability does not remain abstract. It affects internal security structures. When governments change frequently, security leadership rotates, policy priorities shift, continuity weakens, opposition movements test boundaries. Criminal networks may exploit distraction. Public confidence in state authority can erode. Instability does not automatically produce chaos, but it increases vulnerability. In such moments, leadership must project steadiness. Not force, not panic, steadiness. Because in volatile systems, perception of control often becomes control itself. Time is limited. Governments approaching elections do not operate with open horizons. They operate under countdown pressure. Peru ranks among the world's leading copper producers. Mining exports anchor foreign exchange stability and investor confidence. Global markets monitor signals closely. Investors calculate timelines. If elections approach, structural reforms slow. If uncertainty lingers, capital hesitates. If volatility increases, risk premiums rise. Markets move in weeks. Institutional repair takes years. Economic reaction is immediate. Political repair is gradual. That gap defines the pressure facing leadership. Even silence becomes a message. Even delay becomes a signal. Peru is not alone in facing institutional stress. Across Latin America, volatility has emerged in cycles. But Peru's pace of presidential turnover stands out. Frequent leadership transitions shape international narratives. And narratives influence investment flows, diplomatic leverage, regional influence. Stability functions as geopolitical currency. Repeated turnover reduces that currency. The longer uncertainty persists, the stronger the perception of unpredictability becomes. And perception shapes positioning on the global stage. Modern political transitions are not fought only inside legislative chambers. They unfold across media ecosystems. Another presidency tested. Another institutional moment. Another chapter in a cycle repeated too often. 6 presidents since 2016 is not coincidence. It is structural strain, a stress fracture within the system, and fractures either heal or widen. The current administration does not hold a mandate for revolution. It holds a mandate for preservation, to stabilize, to oversee credible elections, to prevent escalation, to slow the cycle. Because the real question is not who governs next. The real question is whether the system can outlast its own turbulence. History will not remember procedural speeches. It will remember endurance. Democracies are not defined by the absence of crisis. They are defined by whether institutions absorb pressure without breaking. And the next chapter will determine whether this was another rotation, or a turning point, another president, another oath, another transition. 8 presidents in less than a decade. That statistic alone tells you the story is bigger than one man. José María Balcázar now carries the responsibility not to transform Peru, but to hold it together. Whether this moment becomes a reset or another rotation will shape Peru's democratic future far beyond 2026. If you care about how global political shifts affect economic stability, democratic resilience, and the balance of power, subscribe, because this is not just Peru's story. It is a lesson in how modern democracies survive turbulence. And we're just getting started.